The South Carolina Humanities Council, I know several of you asked, who are you and what do you do? Well, we're going to try and make that a little more understandable today. My name is Randy Akers. I'm Executive Director of South Carolina Humanities. I'm in my 31st year as Director of the Humanities. And people always ask me, what are the humanities? And I honestly would say on any given day, I will give you a different answer of what the humanities are. It's not easily definable, but the best that I can do is simply say it's kind of what unites us as human beings. It's the human experience. When you look at the disciplines of the humanities, you look at history and archaeology that kind of give us a context of who we are and some of our past and how we understand our present. When you look at literature, you look at stories and you see yourselves in those stories. I really think the humanities often are the stories that we relate to one another and communicate to one another. We all have stories, our community has stories, our nation has stories, our world has stories. And that's part of the overall human experience, I think, with those stories. If you look at philosophy and religion and ethics, you look at some of the values that we hold very dearly. Things like justice and equality, things like that. If you look at art, you look at the way we express ourselves and our creativity and our imagination, so forth. So the humanities really, in a way, are kind of everything for everybody, but I think it's how we understand ourselves a little better, how we understand the world in which we live a little bit better, and that to me are the humanities. Of course, if I'm speaking at a Rotary Club at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody's sleepy after eating lunch, I say, do you remember in school, either in high school or in college, at about 1 o'clock when you're sleepy after eating lunch and you had to go either to a history class or an English class? Everybody shakes their head. Those are the humanities. But we try and make them a little less boring than that. So, at any rate. But we're glad that you are here. With me today is Teresa Wallace, who is our Assistant Director. And TJ is, I'll embarrass her, but I think probably the best grants officer in the state of South Carolina, and knows an awful lot about grants, and she'll be the one speaking the most today because she stays on course. I kind of ramble and she gets mad at me, so I'll just ad-lib a little bit here and there, but TJ is the one who knows about grants. Also with us is Laura McGuinn in the back. She's our communications coordinator. We have 4 full-time staff people with South Carolina Humanities. So 3/4 of us are here today. We do have one in the office who's answering phones. And we do have a part-time person in Spartanburg who helps us a little bit, Judy Bynum. So we're not a huge organization, but we're the state program of the National Endowment for the Humanities. In 1965, you might remember that President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the National Endowment for the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts, Corporation for Public Broadcast, and the Institute of Museum and Library Science. Those are the 4 major cultural organizations existing in the United States still today. They came into being during the Great Society of 1965. And as you know, through those years, politically, all 4 of those institutions have had their own struggles, but all have survived, and I'm sure glad that they have. We are a nonprofit organization. We're governed by a board currently of 21 board members. Leslie Bickford, an English professor at Winthrop, is currently on our board. Last night at the opening over at the White Home, we had 3 former board members from Rock Hill that were there, so it was nice to see them. Some of you may know the former mayor, Betty Jo Ray. She was a longtime board member of ours, and we love Miss Betty Jo. So, but at any rate, so that's a little bit about who we are. Hopefully all of you, some of you have just come in. Make sure you get our newsletter and brochure, and that'll tell you an awful lot more about us. We primarily are a grant funding organization. That's why we're doing a grants writing workshop. That's why you're here today. We do some initiatives of our own, including an annual Humanities Festival that we take to different communities around the state to highlight. We also bring Smithsonian traveling exhibits to South Carolina, and we do a lot of things. I hope that you will look at our website. Laura does a great job of communicating not only by our website, but various social medias. So if you get on our mailing list and our email list, you'll have a chance to see an awful lot of things that are happening around here locally and throughout the state. That we're a statewide organization. All right, without further ado, I think we're ready to talk a little bit about grants, and I'm going to let TJ take over from here.
Thank you, Randy, and good morning, everybody. Step one to becoming a good grants writer is to know your organization. You know your organization's strengths, weaknesses, capabilities, know your environment, your community, your audience. And that's so that you can really make sure that what your organization is doing is fulfilling a need in the community, so that you can make a compelling case and argument for the funds that you want to receive from other organizations. Of course, you want to make sure that your organization is credible. If you're a nonprofit, you should definitely have your 501c3 status. You should have a DUNS, a DUNS number. And more recently, a lot of organizations are wanting to see, a lot of funding and grant-making organizations are wanting to see that your organization is registered with sam.gov. And that's a process that takes about 2 weeks. It's not very difficult. You have to have your EIN, your business identification number, and your DUNS number, and then you can go ahead and start that registration process with sam.gov. If you go directly to sam.gov, you will be going to the right place to get that registration process started. You don't need to go through a third-party entity. Of course, we all know that an organization needs strong leadership, including a board of directors. And you should have a solid financial infrastructure with ideally an annual audit taking place, so that you can show the grant makers and the funding organizations that your organization is credible, is going to use their funds wisely, and has good governance. Randy, would you like to add anything?
No, I think it's just very important. Every time you're applying for funds, you really want to lead with who you are. They want to know that you're capable of managing funds, capable of carrying out programs, capable of evaluating programs. You know, we probably, in some of the grants that we write, would mention that we're 46 years old. We're governed by a statewide board of volunteer directors. We've given close to $10 million in grants, just so that people know the kind of track record about who you are. The people in your organization, they'll look for, they often will ask for a board of directors, a list of your board of directors. They'll want to know a little bit about your staff people and so forth. So yes, know thyself. It's a very good thing. Plato gave us that piece of wisdom.
Step two. So most people who are writing grants are writing a grant to support a program or a project, like an after-school program for students or something like that. So you need to decide, what is this program or project that you want to offer? What do you want to accomplish, and why is it important? Because that is information that you're going to need to provide in that grant application. Is it also important to your audience? How do you know? Have you kind of taken a survey of the group that may need this kind of program? Have you reached out into the community to make sure there aren't other groups offering a similar program? What outcomes will it produce? And how are you going to figure out those outcomes? How are you going to evaluate your program? What formats are you going to use, and are they appropriate to your audience? Now, some groups may be looking for grants that would support just operational expenses. it's harder to find those types of grants, to be perfectly honest, but there are some foundations and organizations that may support you in that way. But our organization, for instance, will only give grants for programs and the expenses associated with those programs. We can't support office overhead or salaries or things like that. Randy, would you like to add anything before I move on?
Look at your intended program. Look for, in terms of outcomes, be very specific. You know, we're going to serve 45 students after school. We're going to have 3 lecture programs with an intended audience of 150 at each lecture. Yeah, quantitative, qualitative types of information I think is very important when you're looking for your outcomes and then how you're going to evaluate if you've been effective or not.
Going on, do you have the personnel or adequately trained volunteers to run the program? Is your organization an expert in the content, or do you have to bring in a specialist who is? Do you have the time, the space? Can you sustain the project in coming years? That's a question that we often don't see answered fully in the applications that are submitted to us, and our board often kind of zeroes in on that. If we fund this program once, what's going to happen in the future? We can't become a permanent, necessarily year after year funder of your project, so what's going to happen to the project in the future? How will you know if you are achieving the goals? How will you understand what is happening? That goes back to making sure you have some kind of evaluation plan in place. And how will you learn from your mistakes? So, this is one of the most important steps, of course, finding funding sources. A supported project is a partnership that works to accomplish the mutual goals of both the grantor and the grantee. So you want to make sure you're looking for a funding source that's interested in the same types of projects that you are planning on offering. There are different types of funding sources, and they sometimes have different goals. Of course, there's public agencies and funds. I'm thinking of like the South Carolina Arts Commission, for instance, is a state government organization that gives grants and supports arts-based projects around the state. Private foundations and funds could include corporate foundations / the business community, philanthropic, family, or community foundations.
Make sure you do your homework first before you go to the time and trouble of writing a grant. Finding the right funding source is important. You know, if you go and read on our website, our grant guidelines, we don't fund artistic performance. So don't come to us writing a grant saying that I want to fund a ballet at Winthrop University. That would go for a different funding source. So you can spend a lot of time and spin your wheels, but when you do identify a funding source, make sure it's a proper one. The other thing that I find a lot is, and I would say I'm guilty of doing this, sometimes you write a grant and you want to send it to about 6 or 8 different funding sources. And I call that the shotgun approach. That doesn't work. You might have some content that you can certainly use in an application to various funding sources, but make sure you tailor it to the specific source that you're looking at, and make sure that you follow their guidelines. Because you can quickly tell if a person's read your guidelines or not. For example, the largest grant that we give is $8,000. And every once in a while we have someone coming in asking us for $11,000 or $15,000. They probably haven't read our grant guidelines. So yeah, find the right source for your grant, and make sure you read their guidelines carefully and follow their instructions.
Yeah, and one of my favorite grants writing workshops I've attended, the facilitator talked about finding your funding source is kind of like dating and finding your marriage partner. Sometimes you have to date around a little bit before you find the right perfect partnership, that's somebody that's going to be really interested in and supportive of your program, and want to be in it with you for the long haul.
The other thing is, make sure you have very thick skins, because probably for every grant that we might write, we'll be rejected 3 or 4 times. I always take it personally when a grant that I write is rejected. How come? This is the greatest idea that's ever been in the humankind. And other people didn't see it that way. Well, you have to, like I said, kind of develop thick skin. This is not a science. You're going to be reviewed by people who some days, you know, maybe they're fighting with their spouse, and then they read your proposal. So, you know, at any rate, yeah, kind of develop a sense of humor too. And make sure you have people around you that can help you either write it or read it and understand it. Yeah, the more support you have, the better off you are. But at any rate, it's kind of a complex process, but well worth the effort.
Some other important points to consider, and Randy's kind of covered some of these, but who funds in my area of interest? So are you looking for an arts program? Are you looking for a program reaching youth? Or you need to make sure you're approaching a funding source that is interested in what you're doing. Who funds in your geographic region? Has the grantmaker funded organizations like mine before? Many grant-making organizations will list the grants that they've given recently on their website. That's a great thing to peruse to get a sense of what kind of projects they are funding, what kind of types of programming they're interested in. For instance, on our website, we have all the grants we've made back to 2007. You could spend a lot of time there. Get a really good sense of what our board likes and doesn't like. How much does the grantmaker give to organizations like mine? That's exactly what Randy was talking about. Don't ask for $50,000 if they only give grants for $10,000. So, some resources for finding the grantmakers that you want to date/marry. The Foundation Center directory online. It's a fairly expensive program, so most individuals are not going to be able to access it from home, but the South Carolina State Library is a subscriber. You can use it there for free, and it's also available at select libraries in Georgetown, Charleston, Florence, Anderson, and Spartanburg, and at all the library branches in Greenville County. The South Carolina State Library itself is a wonderful resource for grants. They have a whole page on their website that's a grant resource page. They have the South Carolina Foundation directory on there. I think it's from 2014. I don't know if it's been updated since then or not, but they have that version on there for people to access. They offer free grants writing programs themselves at their location in Columbia. In fact, I think they have several upcoming this spring, one in April and one in May. And they've got a number of other resources on there that are really, really useful that you can access from home, from your own computer. Of course, you can look for government grants. Grants.gov is a good place to look for those opportunities. You can access newsletters and nonprofit literature from your community. You can go to training programs like this one through personal contacts, or GuideStar if you're seeking funding from a foundation. It's a free service where you can plug in the name of the foundation and look at their 990s, which will show you whom they've given grants to and in what amounts, which again is a really good piece of information to have, a really good clue to see if that foundation is a good fit for you to take the time to apply to.
Every organization is going to be a little bit different in what they seek. Government grants probably will ask you to fill out more paperwork than private foundations.
Yeah, that was a good segue into the next slide, Randy. Follow the Grantmakers Guidelines. There are a variety of proposal formats, like Randy has said, that they may want from you, whether it's just a letter as the first step, and they review the letters and then decide whom they may want to invite to submit a more thorough proposal. A lot of grant makers have online forms now, which can be good. Sometimes they can be tricky to navigate too, though. They may ask for a very structured narrative. They may have very specific questions they want you to answer, like a who, what, when, where, and why kind of thing. Or they may not give you any guidelines like that, and you can just submit kind of an open narrative where you get to describe your program as you see fit. But it always is probably still wise to try to answer those main questions of who is it going to serve, why are you doing it, where is it going to be, how is it going to happen. Of course, pay attention to deadlines, not just the deadline for the application, which certainly you want to be on top of, but for instance, our organization, we have monthly mini grants, which I'll discuss more later, that are accepted on the first business day of every month for programs that start after the 15th of the following month. So you need to make sure you're applying in time for a deadline that's in time for the program element that you want to present. Because if you apply on April 1st for a program that's taking place April 30th, then it's not going to work for us. And it's always a good idea to follow up with the grant maker, not in an obnoxious way, but just, if it's been more than the allotted amount of time that they indicated it would take to respond to your application, to send an email or a phone call and just check in. It shows your interest. It shows that that you are really paying attention to what's going on with the grants.
I would say also, as you're organizing your proposal, many funding sources will accept phone calls and emails from you while you're in the process. We encourage people to submit drafts to us so that we get a chance to review them, and believe me, we get scads of questions about budget. Budgets are always very cumbersome and difficult to face and very mysterious. So we try and help you as you are organizing and putting your proposal together. Our hope, in our case, staff does not make any funding decisions. We have a board of directors who does that. Our job is to make your grant proposal in the best possible light so that it has a good chance of being approved by our board of directors. So I think what TJ is saying, encouraging you to talk with your grant maker if they do accept that, and they can give you some very valuable advice as you're putting your grant proposal together.
So now you are ready to write your grant proposal. I recommend, personally, I've seen it in my own experience, to work extra hard on the abstract section. It may be the only thing that the reviewers read. Like Randy said, you never know. This group of reviewers, they may end up with 30 applications when they are used to only having 15 at any given deadline, and they may be rushing, and or they may have read all of your application a month ago, but now that it comes time to sit down and sit with the committee and make decisions, they have to go back to that project abstract to really remind them what it is that your organization is asking for, what your organization is going to be doing. So that project abstract should have all the basic details laid out in a very friendly, easy to read manner. Who, what, when, where, why. Bam, right there at the beginning of your application. Then, if they ask you to go into more detail later in the application or in the narrative, make sure that you're organizing your goals in order of importance, organizing your actions in chronological order, use simple, direct language, avoid jargon, certainly avoid unsupported claims or vague claims like we're going to reach hundreds of children, but not explaining how or why, how are you going to get them to your program. Be positive, avoid tentative words like possibly or maybe or things like that. Of course, don't use multiple typefaces if you're writing one that's being submitted not online. And this is a tip that I think is really important. Don't use guesswork on your budget. Make sure you can substantiate why you're asking for the money that you're asking for. Some people will think, well, maybe I really only need $5,000 for my program, but maybe I should ask for $7,000 just in case they cut me or see reasons to cut me. But that is never a good plan, because usually the review committee is looking very closely at the budget. And if they see things that make them question what you're asking for, then it can throw your whole application and your organization's program into question for that review committee and make it seem like they that your organization may not really be using funds wisely or even know what you're doing for the program. Give yourself plenty of time to write a first draft of the proposal. Let it sit, read it again, have someone from outside your organization read it, maybe somebody who doesn't know the program as well as you do, so that they can make sure that you're really clearly explaining what it is you intend to do. If you're using technology or some other kind of specialized thing that you need to do, make sure that you have someone with expertise in that area read it so that they can give you feedback. And you can check with the grant-making organization, see if they will read your draft like our organization does. So you will want to ask yourself these questions. Have you presented a compelling case for your project? Are the goals clear? Is the project well designed, and are the goals obtainable? Are the resources adequate? How can you measure the results? Will the technology remain appropriate? And how will this project sustain itself in the long run? Final reminders. Begin your planning and writing early. It always takes longer than you think it will. Apply by the stated deadline. Read the guidelines several times and make sure you follow them. I mean, this seems like it should be self-explanatory, but you would be amazed by how many grants we receive, and we're just a small funding organization, where people have clearly not read our guidelines, have not answered the questions that we want them to ask in the application, have sent in an application at a time that's not appropriate for, there's not even a deadline for that grant at that time. So I don't want to seem like I'm stating the obvious, but just make sure you're following all the guidelines, because that is very, very important. If they ask for a cover letter, make sure, like we talked about with the abstract, that it's a strong first impression. Answer all the questions and don't exaggerate the budget.
I would just add also, it's always helpful to most reviewers of funding sources if you do have some letters of support from the local community. As well, and that adds to it. Every once in a while, we get a grant request of ours, and it's got a letter of support from Senator Graham. So, you know, we pay attention to that, and we pay attention when mayors or other people write letters of support, and that helps strengthen your application.
So keep the relationship alive. Try to develop an ongoing and cordial relationship with your funding source. Don't let them down by not following their guidelines. They may have reporting requirements. They may want an interim report. They may need an interim and a final report. Make sure you follow through with those and share with them what you're doing. You can send pictures, you can send updates. Most funding sources, smaller funding sources probably, will enjoy getting that kind of information and seeing how your project is going on. If your proposal is rejected, call, see if you can get feedback. Ask if you can get notes from the grants officer or somebody on staff about what the feedback was from their committee, and see if you can improve your application. Ask about the possibility of applying again if you make some changes. And then develop partnerships that allow for creative solutions and institutional satisfaction for your organization. South Carolina Humanities is the state program of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are primarily federally funded, but we are a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1972 and awarded our first grant in 1973. And we are an organization that serves the whole state, but our offices are in Columbia. So we have a variety of programs that we offer, and of course the one that we're going to go into the most detail about is the South Carolina Humanities Grants Program, which is our oldest program and longest running program, and when they opened their doors in 1972 was the only program that they offered was giving grants. But over the years we've developed a number of other projects and programs that we've offered. Many of you may be familiar with the South Carolina Encyclopedia, edited by Dr. Walter Edgar, which was published in 2006 and sold over 20,000 copies, and now is available online at scencyclopedia.org, which is a wonderful resource and is being updated and maintained with the support of the University of South Carolina. Of course, Randy talked about the South Carolina Humanities Festival. That is an annual event that's in Rock Hill this weekend, and the 2020 festival will be in Moncks Corner. We have a wonderful ongoing partnership with the Smithsonian Institution called the Museum on Main Street program, where we bring traveling Smithsonian exhibits to rural communities in South Carolina, usually of towns of 20,000 or less people. Right now we're touring an exhibit called Crossroads: Change in Rural America. It is opening in Barnwell tomorrow at the Barnwell County Library. That's the fifth community that it's visited since September, and there's one more community that it'll visit after Barnwell, and that's Dillon. And then a little later I'll talk about our next Smithsonian exhibit that we're bringing. We have a Speakers Bureau Humanities Out Loud program. We have a roster of about 40 speakers who speak on a wide variety of humanities topics, everything from Chautauqua-style living history presentations of historical figures of note, to literary programming, to programs about the Gullah culture, programs about Native American culture in South Carolina. So a whole bunch of different types of topics are on that list. One of our other oldest programs is called Let's Talk About It Reading and Discussion Program that was developed by the American Library Association in the 1980s. So in partnership with the South Carolina State Library, South Carolina Humanities offers themed sets of books. It's a program that's primarily used by libraries, but occasionally by other groups. Occasionally, we've had a retirement community use the program. The Pat Conroy Literary Center in Beaufort used the Let's Talk About It program. But basically, you receive sets of books to hand out so that you can have book discussions with your audience. And South Carolina Humanities gives small grants of $500 to pay for scholars to come and interact with your group about the books that they're reading. So it's kind of like an amped up book club. We have our annual Governor's Awards in the Humanities that we give to notable South Carolina people or organizations that have served the public humanities in the state. And right now the nomination process is open through April 15th. And then we have a number of programs that we include under our Literary South Carolina name that includes our fast track literary grants that I'll go into more detail about later. So we make several categories of grants available to nonprofit organizations or public institutions. So we do give grants to universities. It could be a town or a municipality or something like that. For public humanities programs, which would include things like documentaries, exhibits, lecture series, festivals, conferences, oral history programs, discussion forums based on a humanities topic. And Randy told you about the humanities. What are the humanities? It's hard to say, but these are the main disciplines that are included in the umbrella of the humanities. Like Randy said, history and literature are the ones we get grants about most frequently, something based in literary programming or historical programming, but also folklore, philosophy, comparative religion, archaeology, African American studies, Southern studies, linguistics and languages, ethics, jurisprudence, political science, anthropology, international studies, women's studies, and then I'm going to talk about the art stuff in a minute, and then those aspects of the social sciences which have humanistic content. So Randy talked a little bit about art and how that's different from the humanities. South Carolina Humanities and other state humanities councils around the country do fund programs in art history, art theory, and art criticism. So basically when you're talking about art, but we generally don't fund outright performance or creation of art. So we would not give a grant for to commission a sculpture for downtown Rock Hill.
Or the Rock Hill Symphony.
Right, but maybe we would give a grant to the symphony if they were doing something that was based on Gullah music and they brought in a scholar to talk about the history of Gullah music. So if Randy has said before, artists do, humanists talk about it. So if it's creation, that's probably not, creation of art, that's probably not for us, but if it's a program that's going to talk about the context of the art that's being presented, that might be a program that we would support. So now I'm going to go over our grant categories. As y'all have seen from the yellow sheet that you have, we have several categories. We offer major grants. That's our largest grant. The maximum request is $8,000. Those grants are reviewed twice a year by our board of directors. We had a deadline in January for programs that started after March 15th, and then we'll have another deadline Wednesday, August 14th for programs that start after November 1st. All of our grants require a one-to-one match, which means if you're asking us for $8,000, your organization also has to be providing at least $8,000 towards the cost of the program for a total program cost of $16,000. Now, your match does not have to be entirely or even at all cash dollars. It could be in-kind match, which means donated time, goods, or services. So, for instance, if your small nonprofit is mostly volunteer run, the people who are planning this program are going to present this program, their time counts as an in-kind cost share. If you are using a space for free, like here at the York County Library, we didn't have to pay a fee to use the space. That would count as in-kind cost share. So we often, I think our board prefers to see some cash match because it shows that your organization is really invested in the program. But we have sometimes received applications and approved applications where the match was entirely in kind, often from very small, rural, all volunteer organizations that maybe don't have any cash match to offer. So. And all of our guidelines and applications are available on our website at schumanities.org. Right now, we're offering a themed request for proposals on Hometown Humanities that has the same amount of money that you can request and the same deadlines as our major grants, but it's a specific theme that our board was interested in seeing if any groups across the state wanted to apply for this theme. And basically they wanted to explore topics that were interesting to local communities that had maybe not been explored before. And specifically they wanted to see partnerships in the local community. So that was a requirement that for this grant opportunity, the applying organization needs to partner with at least one and even preferably more cultural or educational organizations in their community. So that opportunity also has a deadline of Wednesday, August 14th for programs that start after November 1st, and the maximum request is also $8,000. We offer monthly mini and planning grants. They both have a maximum request of $2,000. They both are accepted monthly on the first business day of the month for programs that start after the 15th of the following month. Mini grants are designed to support public programs of modest costs. So perhaps a public library might want to bring in one speaker or maybe a special children's program or something like that. That would be a program that would cost less than $4,000 total, because don't forget your one-to-one match. Or with our planning grants, what's different between mini and planning grants is that planning grants are awarded to support preliminary work and designing a project that warrants detailed planning because of its length, scope, or cost. So we often award planning grants to documentary projects that may be in the preliminary phase of bringing scholars together to consult, or designing a treatment or original scripting pieces before they get into the production phase. We've also given planning grants for major traveling exhibit projects. For instance, one at Clemson University called Black Clemson. We gave them a planning grant for preliminary work to design that exhibit. So mostly we get mini grants. We don't get as many planning grants as we get mini grants, but it's a very useful grant if you are doing a major program that requires extensive planning. Our newest category of grant is our fast track literary grants. We've been offering those since 2016. They have a maximum request of $3,000 and they're reviewed quarterly. The application is fairly simple. It's even a little bit simpler than our mini grant application. And fast track literary grants are intended to support new or existing public literary programs such as writer series, festivals, conferences, workshops, community reading programs, or writers' residencies at schools. So there's two deadlines still in 2019 for the Fast Track Literary Grants, June 3rd and September 3rd. And the Fast Track Literary Grants are presented in partnership with the South Carolina Arts Commission. So those two programs that I spoke about a little bit earlier, the Speakers Bureau and the Let's Talk About It Reading and Discussion Program, each are very simple applications that allow you to get these programs for your organization. And then we occasionally offer special grant opportunities, like that themed request for proposals on Hometown Humanities or for our Museum on Main Street program. Just a little more detail about our Speakers Bureau program. 40 speakers with over 150 diverse speaking topics, ranging from growing up Gullah to poetry and public life, to some of those historical impersonations I mentioned. We have an Abraham Lincoln impersonator who thinks he is Abraham Lincoln. He signs his emails to me, Abraham. And he has a whole list of like ways he is similar to Abraham Lincoln, like the same height, same foot size. They both have 4 sons. South Carolina Humanities makes these programs available to nonprofit groups. We provide a $250 honoraria that we send directly to the speaker for an approved program. Some of our speakers do ask for additional honoraria beyond that, especially if they have to travel an extensive way for the program. And that's kind of on a case-by-case basis, which I can answer any questions about that if you look at our roster and are interested in any particular speaker. It still requires a one-to-one match, so your organization has to provide at least $250 towards the cost of the program, but that's usually very simple just with the time of the person who's organizing the program and the place where it's going to be presented. So the review process for our major, mini, planning, and fast track literary grants, they are all reviewed, as Randy said, by our board of directors. Staff has no ultimate input into the funding amount, although we try to read their minds. And when I am discussing with you your project or looking at a draft of your application, I try to give you as much input as I can to let you know whether I think it will be well received or not, or whether it's a good fit for funding for our program, for our offerings. Notification for major grants is made within 6 weeks of the submission date, and for mini planning and fast track literary grants, it's more like 3 to 4 weeks for mini and planning grants and 5 weeks for fast track literary grants. So.
Let me put a plug into, if you are applying to us, let us know that and let us kind of review and see what you're doing. I will say this, we do sometimes have applicants who bypass staff and staff recommendations or critique. They might come in the day before the deadline for a board review. Most of the grants that have been rejected by us are ones that have not gone through staff review. Just a word to the wise.